Apparently, no atrocities occurred on October the 7th, at least according to the people who committed the atrocities on October the 7th. A new survey of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank reveals that 90% of them deny the fact that Gazans raped, tortured, killed 1,200 people in Israel and kidnapped 250, which is a bit ironic because they also believe in the big ghost in the sky. But anyway, the report also shows support for Hamas terrorists is still very, very much widespread among the population. And the innocent Gazas, who are largely in favor of armed intifada, death, and destruction.
Welcome to the Daily Objective. This is day 253 of the war in Israel, and we're joined by Daniel Kraus. Good to see you, Daniel.
Hey, guys.
What we're focusing on today is this survey by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research. Now, these guys do regular surveys. They do them every few months. They've been doing them for a long time. This is their 92nd one. And as far as these kind of surveys go for this kind of area, this is about as good as it gets in terms of a litmus test of what people think. I can give you a little bit of their methodology as to how they work. So this particular survey has been done by surveying about 1,570 people, half in Gaza, half in the West Bank, in sort of 75 separate locations in each of those two areas. So that includes in Gaza, it includes within towns, within built-up shelters, within tent areas as well. So there is a mix. It includes in Rafah, Khan Yunis, Al-Mawasi in the central Gaza Strip as well. But it's a regular survey, so it's the most reliable of its kind. So there's no particular reason to doubt it beyond the fact that obviously it comes from the source that it does. And certainly it's revealing in terms of a lot of what it shows up in terms of the attitudes of both Gazans and people in the West Bank when it comes to all sorts of issues, including October the 7th. So Daniel, what was your first reaction to what you've seen of this survey?
Yeah, so I'm glad this one came out, since I was tired of always quoting the last one. So it's nice to have the update. And yeah, I'm not that much surprised. Nothing, as I said, nothing surprising came out. We're gonna be talking mainly about the October 7th, but we'll also talk about the leadership. So I'm just looking at my notes, trying to find out what's the best start. So I guess we can discuss the support for October 7th overall. So it seems to be dropping. So in December 23, which I think was the first survey they've done, or the first poll. So they have done 3 in total after October 7th. So it went from 72% in the first one, then to 71% in the second one, and now it's 67%. This is overall, so Gaza and the West Bank. Something that's interesting is that not really surprising that in the West Bank, the support for October 7th is much higher still, which is not really surprising, since when you don't feel the consequences of certain actions, you are much more likely to support them. But even in Gaza, it's still 57% people believe that the October 7 was correct decision, I think was the precise wording of the poll question. This is actually a drop from 71 in the second poll, which was in March, but that was increased from 57. So it's pretty much the same as it has been in December 23rd. So we see they still support it, and we have some more interesting numbers later, which is going to give even more insight into the mind of the Palestinian people. But so far, they do still support it. The war effort is still going on. Israel hasn't apparently, and not surprisingly, hasn't done enough that the Palestinian people really regret the actions committed by Hamas. As I said, it's pretty much the same number as it has been in December, meaning the Palestinian people themselves don't really, and the people in Gaza, I mean, don't really feel any change from December 23rd, which is more than 6 months.
Yeah, and here we're talking about not a small majority, but it's 2/3. And of course, 2/3 of the people responding to the survey is probably a bit higher because some people surely didn't have the goal to take a position. What's quite striking is the kind of this support for October the 7th. As I said, nearly 67% actively support October the 7th events, and 90% deny the atrocities. Is that 80% also seem to think that the October the 7th event were actually positive because attract the attention of the media of the world. So most people see as a PR exercise, which is pretty damning as a description of how people feel about it, because they're quite happy to die and see people dying because it's good for the PR propaganda, and which is what we've been saying, all along, that these people in Gaza, because the nature of their worship of death, they actually find higher civilian death as something in their favor because it makes Israel look bad. And Sinwar, I think was it Sinwar, even admitted as much. They want to show death and destruction because it makes Israel looks bad. But also the event at the UN, the ICC and the ICJ procedures are seen as good propaganda. And the same way as the student protests in the West, 69% of the people think that it's a good thing. It looks like 69% think that the student protests in the West are actually helping the Palestinian cause.
I think one of the things that's interesting about that last one is the fact that they're well aware of those US protests going on in the campuses in the US universities, because that has been fed back to them. And of course, we have seen a lot of people in Gaza holding up support signs for the students, which has again bolstered the students for protesting even more. So you can see a lot of the propaganda going on here. I'm not sure exactly, it's hard to ascertain from this survey exactly what people think did happen on October the 7th when they support it, but don't think atrocities occurred. So I don't know whether, because it's clear they clearly know about hostages, they clearly know about those kind of things. So what it might come down to is simply that Gazans don't consider any of what happened atrocities, including taking hostages. So it's revealing, to say the least.
Can I just also mention something else? There seemed to be, throughout the survey, seems to be a split between West Bank and Gaza. Of course, we are using the term Palestine to include the people in West Bank and Gaza, but we're talking about the same Arab population. So even the report itself, if you like, is a kind of propaganda tool to make you think about Palestinian as a single entity. But, that's just a fictitious name to mean the people in Gaza and West Bank. Something interesting was actually they also did a survey about the source of the news. It looks like...
Oh, actually, before we go to that, I also want to mention, because there was... So you mentioned the fact that 90% of Palestinians don't believe Hamas has committed atrocities. This is actually a line in the article, but when you look at the actual survey, they actually asked two different kinds of people: the people who watched the atrocities that have happened, the videos, and the people who didn't watch it. Even the people who watched it, they are split, I think, 44 to 56%. So Palestinians who have watched the videos, and it's not that many of them. That's why it only goes from 96 to 90% support. So not many people of Palestinians have watched the videos, and the ones that do, 56% of them are not what's the word? Are not convinced by it. And from the people who actually haven't watched it, it actually goes up to 96%. So 96% of the Palestinian survey don't believe of the people who haven't watched the videos, don't believe Hamas has committed any atrocities on October 7th.
Yeah. And also, it also shows that people who watch the video are 15 times more likely to acknowledge the events of October the 7th. However, it's still a miserable number, a really, really small number. But what I was going to say is that the major source of news in the West Bank is Al Jazeera. So 83% of the people interviewed use Al Jazeera as their favorite source of news. Which suggests something quite interesting, because Al Jazeera is the Qatari state sponsor news outlet. And also Qatar is hiding the Hamas leadership. So to me, it looks like Qatar is actively radicalizing the West Bank in order to increase the support of Hamas in the West Bank. And this is exactly what we see. When we look at the West Bank supports Hamas more than the Gaza Strip.
I think on the subject of people who've watched the videos, it makes me question what the purpose of those videos was, the GoPro videos carried out by that terrorist, Hamas terrorists at the time of October the 7th, whether it was purely for their own gratification and for showing to their friend, because a lot of the coverage of that since has been to conceal those videos from the view of people in the West, because obviously that makes it very clear who the real victims are in this, as opposed to shifting the emphasis onto the population in Gaza as supposedly being the victims of this. So and at the same time, if it's Gazans who haven't been shown those videos to a large extent or claim they haven't seen them, and of course we don't know whether that's easier to pretend you haven't seen it and don't really know the details of those atrocities than perhaps to admit to somebody carrying out a survey, what you really know, what you really think. It's hard to say which of those two it is. What do you think, Daniel, to that point, the purpose of these videos?
It's a hard question. I think mainly it does seem a sort of psychological warfare. Yeah, I mean, they record them and they put them immediately on the internet. People can immediately see them. So they'll see, the Israelis will see their own family, maybe their sons and daughters. I mean, especially with the Nova Festival, they'll see horrible things done to them. They might see them killed. They might see them, I mean, even raped in some cases. I think that was the main thing they're doing. This is basically what ISIS has been doing in the past. So Hamas is increasingly becoming similar to them. That's what they've done, and it was all basically it was psychological warfare, basically, to scare them off, basically trying to do anything back. And when you listen to, I mean, we've talked about Sinwar, he actually wasn't expecting Israel to actually do a ground operation in Gaza. So they have definitely miscalculated there. But again, not too much, since the other thing they believed in, that the international community will come in to support Hamas, that has basically happened. So they might have miscalculated a little bit, but not too much. And especially since, and we'll talk about this more later, but popularity for Hamas, for Sinwar, for also for October 7, and the most importantly, the support for continued armed struggle and potentially, I'm not sure, I can't remember how exactly, but another intifada or third intifada, I'm not sure how exactly was it specified, but a support for that kind has been increasing the longer this conflict goes on, which some people have, when we talk about how there needs to be a harsh response to what happened on October 7, many people say, well, you'll just radicalize more people. And that has been something that we've seen from the polls, that since October 7th, people have been radicalized more the longer it goes on. But that goes to show that Israel non-response or very mild response to October 7 is actually what is driving it. if Israel actually has responded harshly and strongly, the support for October 7 would actually go down much further, and we might actually see some resistance coming even from the Palestinians. But so far, we don't see any. They like their leaders. Both the people in the West Bank and Gaza like Hamas. To some extent, they like their leaders. And when they don't like their leaders, it is because they support someone who is much more violent and much more unapologetic about the so-called Palestinian resistance to Israeli occupation.
Yeah. And of course, when it comes to whether those Gazans have seen the videos or not, that's kind of academic to many, to a large extent, because some of them participated in crossing the border and, you know, helping with taking hostages themselves. And of course, those that didn't, many were celebrating on the streets as the hostages were brought back into Gaza. And of course, you know, the first-hand passing of knowledge between the population of Gaza, we know how densely packed it is. We're always being told that. So the idea that they have limited knowledge about what happened on October the 7th is really hard to sustain. I just wanted to thank Bonnie Bertrand for the super chat. Thank you very much, Bonnie. We appreciate your support, as we do every day.
Going back and talking about the survey, there is a section which kind of highlights the sort of violent attitude that seems to be entrenched in the culture of Gaza and the West Bank. So much so that 56% of the respondents support an armed retaliation in order to further the cause of the Palestinians in the Middle East. 64% are quite open in supporting another intifada. So their solution is not sitting around the table or finding a solution which is peaceful, but the favorite choice is actually fighting, dying. And as I said before, because October 7 is seen as a PR victory, these guys are probably motivated to do another one. So that's why if you don't wipe out Hamas, if you don't put them in a situation where they will never be able to commit another October 7, they will. They're telling you by saying that, you know, 64% supports Intifada. To them is a victory just to be on the news, because they think they highlight their plea and the behavior of certain states in the West, effectively rewarding these violent actions by giving them a state or arguing that want to recognize Palestine, of course, emboldens them and makes them even more violent. It's a case where violence pays, and you know, why should they come to a peaceful solution? But what's quite interesting and it's quite revealing is that 75% do not want intervention of an Arab army or support force, because, you know, they don't want to win. They don't want to be seen as not being the victims.
Yeah, well, that one is they 75% oppose the Arab security forces working in the Gaza Strip, even if they're deployed to assist the Palestinian security forces. And I think that's particularly interesting. The fact that not only do they want to retain the idea that Israel is the enemy and they want no other forces in there to be against, they also don't want any other Arab countries involved because of the considerable different groups of factions within different Arab countries and the animosity between those factions, which complicates things politically and socially between different groups anyway. So it's very clear they want to both prolong this war and also not have that assistance. And then when it comes to the support for an armed intifada, you're hearing the absolute opposite of what you're hearing on your Western media in your Western campuses, where it's all talk about negotiation or peaceful resistance or any of those kind of things. Those get tiny percentages in relation to the armed struggle or an out-and-out third intifada. So the dissonance there, the contrast there between those two positions is vast, and people really ought to wake up to that in the West.
Do you want to cover the political support now?
Yeah, I'll pretty much run down a couple of statistics or a couple of the polls, and they all seem to really show that one, the Palestinians really have barely felt the cause of the war. Maybe not much as on the material front. I mean, pretty much most of the Gazans, if I'm not mistaken, have been moved around, so they felt it in this way. But ideologically, they haven't felt anything. None of their support for Hamas, support for October 7, or hatred for the Jews have wavered in any way. So still, 50% of the Palestinians expect Hamas to stay in power. Imagine, just imagine how much area Israel already controls in Gaza, and how much it's attacking. Imagine if like Nazis or the Germans in like 1945, like early in January, would believe, 50% of them would believe, oh yeah, Nazis will stay power after the Soviets and the Americans come in and occupy the whole nation. Yeah, we'll stay in power. We have a good belief in that. I think that one statistic should tell Israel enough that, yeah, this war hasn't been conducted in the way it should have been. But even more, we've talked about the sort of more and more rejection of any kind of two-state solution. So 60% of the Palestinians support Palestinian authorities dissolution, and which is that's Fatah and Mahmoud Abbas. And again, those are not some kind of like champions of peace, champions of like two-state solution. There are attacks coming from West Bank. There is barely any sort of hope for any sort of peaceful reconciliation, even from them. But that's the kind of image the Palestinian Authority and Mahmoud Abbas get, that they are the sort of like two-state solution reformist kind of people. So yeah, 60% of them support Palestinian Authority dissolution. 89% want Abbas to resign. And if there was an election, 90% of that would go to Hamas, 20% of that would go to Fatah, 33% don't support anyone, which would still get like 67% turnout rate, which is pretty amazing for any country to have such a participation. And I think the rest of the percentages go to like the third parties. And then again, 51% think Hamas is more suitable to basically be the representation of the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
Anything you guys want to say?
Yeah.
There is one more statistics about the preferred leader, but I think we can cover that after this.
Yeah, the report clearly shows that Hamas is increasing. The support for Hamas is increasing in the West Bank, and it's unchanged in Gaza effectively. Sinwar, for example, is popular with 2/3 of the Palestinians, and his support in Gaza is unchanged. It's quite telling. But what's quite interesting,
and just quick, and that's someone who's saying civilian casualties are necessary to basically to achieve the goal. So imagine if you hear your leader saying, oh yeah, some of you will die, but that's the sacrifice I'm willing to make. And you're like, that's the guy I'm going to vote for.
Yeah, and that's the guy hiding in the bunkers under Gaza while he lets his people, suffer for a consequence of his decisions. But what I was saying earlier on, what's interesting, what's happening in the West Bank actually. As I said, the support of Hamas is increasing in the West Bank, radicalized by Al Jazeera, which is the main source of information. It's a Qatari one. But also, as you were mentioning earlier on, the support for Abbas is wavering. But Barghouti, who's the guy who's responsible for the first and second intifadas, is gaining popularity. So he and Hania, which is the leader of Hamas hiding in Qatar, are receiving more and more support. And they are arguing for a more and more violent reaction to Israel. This is quite telling. This is effectively a move towards a more violent future, and a future full of more October the 7th.
Yeah. And I think one of the most telling statistics that essentially covers that is when asked the question, who will win this war, Hamas or Israel? And the difference response between the West Bank and those in Gaza is quite telling, because in Gaza, under half think that it be Hamas that wins. Whereas in the West Bank, it's well over 70% think that Hamas would win. And that goes to show the effect that the actual war is having on beginning to change the Gazans' opinions on the future, as opposed to the West Bank watching Al Jazeera all the time and thinking, therefore, given the propaganda that they've been fed, that it's definitely going to be Hamas that win. Now, we do have some super chats. I wanted to say this is a super chat from Loresetto for $2. Thank you very much. Who says, Hamas, in effect, is a redux of the Hashishans. I don't always know what super chats mean, but I do read them out.
If I'm not mistaken, I might be, but there was like an assassin sort of like cult during the Crusader era. But I think it was like specifically like Shiite Muslims, basically sort of working in secrecy to try to kill influential crusaders or basically kill crusaders in the area. I might be mistaken, but I think that's the reference.
Well, if that's right, that's good knowledge.
Yeah, he says they were the first assassins. So yeah, that's true.
Yeah, well done. Yes, cool. And we also have a super chat from Yotam Silverstein for $1.99, who says, thank you for such an important episode. And this is Yotam's third super chat on a live stream in each of our last 3 shows, this one and the 2 before. So thank you very much, Yotam, for that.
So I guess we're kind of running out of time, so I'll just make one more point. So yeah, so about the preferred leaders. So the people who were polled specifically for the president of the Palestinians. So it was Marwan Barghouti. That's a hard name. I always forget. We've made an episode about him, so if you search his name, you should be able to find him. Ismail Haniyeh, who's the head of Hamas, and Mahmoud Abbas, the current president. And so their popularity was basically Marwan Barghouti, Ismail Haniyeh, and Mahmoud Abbas. And Mahmoud Abbas was like in single digits when it comes to percentages. And you can see the real difference between the opinions of the Palestinian people. So Mahmoud Abbas, someone who is seen as not doing anything against the so-called Israeli occupation, is completely forgotten. Ismail Haniyeh, someone who is at the head of Hamas, but is kind of hiding in Qatar. He's kind of like an elitist. He's not really the man of the people. He is popular, but not that much. But someone who is serving, I think, like 5 or 6 life consecutive sentences, someone who is in jail or in prison for killing Jews. Such a person is popular, and such a person is seen as the heart of the Palestinian people, a real man of the people, if you will.
Yes, a population which holds that guy as the ideal person is really tells a lot about the ideology behind these people, and also it tells us that if you didn't know about it, Palestinian is a lie. Clearly, there isn't a Palestinian people because of the stark differences between Gaza and the West Bank.
And Marwan Barghouti was one of those who the Gazans were particularly keen to have exchanged. The Hamas was particularly keen to have exchanged in the Gilad Shalit exchange. When they exchanged 1,000 prisoners for Gilad Shalit, they were really pushing to have him freed during that, and Israel obviously refused. And at least they did that despite the atrocious nature of that particular deal.
Just to quickly point out, they obviously refused to let out someone who started the first and second Intifada. They'd rather let out someone who started October 7th, which is Yahya Sinwar, who's one of the people who was released during that exchange.
Having already cured him in an Israeli hospital.
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you to our super chatters today. Thank you to our producer, Irene. And we will be back here on the Daily Objective tomorrow. So please do join us then, and have a good day. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.